A winter sky stretched pale as bone over the Wyoming plains, the kind of sky that made the land look older than time itself. The air held a strange stillness, as if the snow and the clouds had forgotten how to fall, just hanging there in the gray distance. The wagon wheels groaned with each turn, their rhythm steady but tired, the same as the two dun-colored horses pulling the weight. The rancher sat hunched against the cold, scarf pulled high, eyes scanning the road ahead like a man who had long ago learned not to expect company out here. The road from town to his ranch was a lonely one, more often crossed by wind than by people. But halfway across the flats, where a stand of winter-dead cottonwoods leaned toward each other as if whispering secrets, something broke the monotony. A wagon, tipped and resting half in a shallow ditch. One wheel had shattered, its spokes jutting like snapped bones. The team was gone, tracks leading off into the open prairie, but the back of the wagon held a shape under a coarse, wool blanket. He slowed, the horses snorting in protest at the sudden halt. For a moment, he just sat there, reins loose in his hands, staring at that unmoving bundle. Coyotes would come for something left alone too long in this cold, and he knew better than to go poking into trouble that wasn't his. But there was a flicker beneath the blanket, a tremor, small but undeniable. He climbed down, boots crunching in the frost-hardened dirt, and stepped toward the wreck. The air felt heavier here, as though it carried more than just winter in its breath. Kneeling beside the wagon, he pulled the blanket back enough to see a pale face, lips cracked from cold, eyes half closed, but lit with something sharp and fierce beneath the exhaustion. Her voice, when it came, was a rasp, barely stirring the air. "Just kill me fast." It wasn't a plea, not exactly. It carried no sob, no desperation. It was a statement, cold and certain, like she'd already decided this was the best she could hope for. He didn't answer right away, just took in the details. The dirt smudged on her cheek, the shadow of a bruise along her jaw, the raw red mark circling one wrist where rope had bitten deep. The seams of her dress were torn at the shoulder, fabric stiff where blood had dried. This wasn't the work of an accident. This was the kind of damage that comes from the hands of men who don't see you as human. He straightened slowly, glancing around the empty land. Whoever had done this might not be far, and he wasn't the kind of man to invite strangers into his home. Out here, you learned to leave trouble where you found it. And yet, there was something in the way she held his gaze, that strange mixture of defiance and surrender, that pinned him to the spot. Without a word, he reached for the edges of the blanket and pulled it tighter around her small frame. She didn't resist as he lifted her into his arms, her weight lighter than he expected. He laid her in the back of his own wagon, among the sacks of flour and the crates of kerosene, and climbed back onto the seat. The horses started forward again, hooves drumming a slow, steady beat against the frozen ground. The wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood, and he found himself glancing back at her more than once. Her eyes were closed now, but her breathing, shallow as it was, still marked her among the living. By the time the last ridge of the plains gave way to the familiar rise of his land, the sky had turned to ash. He pulled into the shadow of his barn, climbed down, and lit a lantern. The light spilled over the wagon bed, catching on the coarse weave of the blanket. He knelt again, hands steady, and eased it back to check her injuries. That's when he froze. It wasn't the bruises that stopped him, nor the half-healed cuts along her arms. It was the mark, a burn, seared deep into the skin over her collarbone. Crude, ugly, and unmistakable. He knew it well. The brand of a clan of outlaws who roamed the territory like ghosts, leaving no witnesses, no survivors. The kind of men whose reputation was carried in the whispers of saloons and in the stories told to keep children from wandering too far from home. He had never seen their work up close before. The blanket slipped in his fingers. He pulled it back over her quickly, the shadows swallowing the mark again. His jaw tightened, breath misting in the cold air. Whatever she'd been through, whatever she was running from, it was bigger than him, and it was coming. Still, when he climbed onto the wagon seat again, he turned the horses toward the ranch house. Not away. The snow began to fall at last, slow and silent, covering their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. The ranch house crouched low at the edge of the prairie, its dark timbers holding the weight of years and storms. Tonight, It glowed faintly from within, the light of a single lantern spilling across the snow, the way a lone heartbeat sends its warmth into the cold body around it. The wind had eased, but its memory lingered in the rafters, moaning softly like a restless sleeper. Inside, the small bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee, the kind that had seeped into the walls from years of brewing before sunrise. She woke there, slow and unsure, her body still wrapped in the coarse wool blanket. Her eyes roamed the unfamiliar ceiling, the shelves crowded with jars, folded linens, and a chipped porcelain pitcher. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard sighed under someone's step. The rancher appeared in the doorway, a shadow cut against the light from the hall. He didn't step in, just set a steaming tin mug on the small table beside the bed, the aroma of bitter coffee curling toward her. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, not meeting his eyes. He stayed a moment longer, then turned and walked away without a word. Later, the door opened again, and it wasn't him this time. A boy no older than 12 shuffled in, balancing a wooden tray. His hair was a tangle, his boots too big, and his grin easy. "Got you some bread and beans," he said, though the words came out like he'd been saving them up all day. She stared at him, unmoving, and after a moment, his smile faltered. He set the tray down, mumbling something about chores, and left without looking back. The day passed in quiet layers. She stayed in that room, eyes half-lidded, the blanket never loosening from her shoulders. The rancher didn't push. He came only to stoke the fire in the iron stove at the foot of her bed, his hands steady and sure, the kind of hands that did a job without speaking. He left the door closed when she wanted it closed, open when she left it so. On the second morning, the coffee was gone when he came to collect the mug. She didn't say anything, but he nodded to himself, just a small tilt of the head. That afternoon, when the boy came back with clean linens stacked high in his arms, she didn't tell him to leave. She let him set them down, even let his chatter spill a little longer before turning away. Snow fell again that evening, heavier this time. The rancher was checking the line of the corral fence when he found them, boot tracks cutting across the drifts, fresh and deep. They came from the south, then turned back the way they'd come, like someone had been watching from a distance. He stood there for a long moment, the cold working its way through his coat. When he came inside, he said nothing. That night, after the supper dishes were washed and stacked, he found her sitting by the fire in the main room, the blanket still around her shoulders. She was staring into the flames, as though they were telling her something only she could hear. Without looking at him, she spoke for the first time since the wagon. "It was a camp," she said softly. "A place where people aren't people." Her voice was flat, like she'd filed all the edges off the words before letting them out. He didn't ask her to explain. He just nodded once, the way you nod to let someone know you heard them, even if you'll never know the whole of it. Hours later, the house was dark, the fire in the main room banked low. He lay awake in his bed, listening to the wind move across the plains. Somewhere far off in that black ocean of night, he heard it, the slow, measured beat of hooves. Not close, not yet, but closer than he wanted. He lay there a long while, staring into the dark, knowing that the snow would not be enough to keep them away. The wind had teeth that night, clawing at the shutters, slipping through cracks to curl around ankles like a restless animal. The prairie beyond the ranch house was a black ocean, its waves of snow shifting under the pull of the storm. Inside, the lantern swayed faintly, shadows lapping at the walls. The rancher knew the weather would slow men down, but not stop them. Not the kind of men who were coming. Near sundown, a knock rattled the door. It wasn't the hard, demanding pound of trouble, but a softer, cautious sound. When he opened it, a peddler stood there, his shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes darting to the darkness behind him as though it carried teeth. He came in quick, shaking the snow from his hat, glancing toward the hallway where the woman's room lay. He didn't sit until the rancher nodded him toward the table. Over a cup of coffee, the peddler leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Dangerous men south of the river," asking after a woman with a brand. He didn't say which brand, didn't need to. His eyes said the rest. Then he thanked them for the warmth, pulled his coat tight, and left before the light was gone, vanishing into the storm as if afraid to linger near whatever was coming. Later, she found the rancher in the main room, checking the rifle by the fire. The storm's howl filled the spaces between them, but she broke it with her voice. She told him about the night she ran, how she'd seen something she wasn't meant to see, something that had frozen the laughter in her throat forever. How they'd kept her alive not out of mercy, but to keep her afraid. She'd been their reminder, their warning to others. And then came the night when fear no longer outweighed the taste of freedom. She'd rather die in the open than live under their rope. He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight sharp in his eyes. He didn't say the word protect. He just said, low and certain, no one's taking you from here. And somehow, the weight of that was more than any promise she'd ever been given. The boy wandered in then, carrying something behind his back. He fidgeted before finally revealing it, an old slingshot, worn smooth from use. He held it out awkwardly. In case you need it, he said. For the first time since she'd arrived, her mouth softened into a smile, small and fleeting, but real. The boy beamed, then hurried away before it could vanish. The house shifted into quiet purpose after that. They moved through the rooms together, fastening shutters against the wind, setting lanterns where the light would carry far, stacking firewood by the back door. The rancher loaded rifles with a steady hand. She tied back her hair, rolling her sleeves as though the act itself was a kind of armor. When the work was done, the night seemed heavier than before. The wind had softened, the snow falling in a slower rhythm, muffling the world. The boy had long since gone to bed. She lingered by the front window, her breath clouding the glass. The horizon was still dark, but there was movement, shadows where no shadows should be, slipping between the fence posts. They were here. The horizon cut itself into the night like a thin blade, its edge catching the first pale fire of dawn. Snow shimmered under that fragile light, each drift holding its breath. Across the white field, figures emerged, slow, deliberate, the way predators approach prey they know has nowhere to run. Their coats flapped in the wind, their boots breaking the crust of ice with sharp, snapping sounds. They stopped at the fence line, a ragged row of shadows against the rising sun. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His voice carried through the cold air like a knife through cloth. We're here for her. Hand her over, and maybe we'll leave you breathing. The rancher stood in the open doorway for a long moment, his shape framed by the faint orange glow from inside. Then he stepped out into the snow, boots crunching slow and measured. In his arms, the wool blanket hung heavy, its folds hiding whatever was inside. He walked toward them, each step sinking deep into the drifts, until he stood close enough to see the lines on the leader's face. You want her? He said quietly. The leader smiled, a thin, cruel thing. The rancher loosened his grip on the blanket, and with one swift motion, he pulled it open. Empty. For the smallest sliver of a second, confusion cracked across the outlaw's face. And in that moment, from behind the barn, a rifle cracked. The shot tore the air apart, and the leader's smile vanished as he stumbled, clutching his side. The field erupted. Gunfire roared in sharp bursts. Horses screamed, rearing and plunging against their reins. The snow churned under boots and hooves, spraying up in dirty clouds as the men scattered for cover. The rancher fired into the fray, steady and unhurried, each shot a punctuation in the chaos. She moved like she'd been born to the fight, the rifle firm against her shoulder. Her breath came in slow, even pulls, her eyes never leaving the man who had branded her, who had kept her alive only to make her wish she wasn't. When the moment opened, she took it, a single unflinching shot. He went down hard, the snow swallowing him. The sound of it all, the gunfire, the shouting, faded as quickly as it had risen. The remaining men broke, galloping hard into the open prairie, their shapes shrinking into the distance until they were nothing but specks against the white. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. The wind had stopped. Snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried, covering the churned ground, the dark stains, the boot prints. It was as if the land itself had decided to forget what had just happened. Inside, the fire in the main room glowed steady and warm. She sat close to it, the same wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. But now it was different. It wasn't hiding her anymore, it was keeping her. She looked toward the rancher, across the small table. He said nothing, and neither did she. They didn't need to. Sometimes the world breaks you in ways no one can see. And sometimes it sends you someone who won't look away when you lift the blanket and show the hurt. That's when you know you've made it home.